Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of Not the Girl Next Door. I'm your host, Meg Reynolds, and first, I just want to say a big shout out to my editor for editing this episode literally the same day I am recording it. Like, I am finishing recording this, sending this to him, he is sending it back. Homie, a real one. The reason I never record episodes the same day, but there's just so much going on currently that I was like, okay, we got to talk about these current events before no one's talking about them anymore. Between the Super Bowl and Kendrick Lamar's halftime performance, obviously, if you've been following the Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively drama, you saw Justin Baldoni, a podcast episode with him on somebody else's podcast. It's the Gents Talk podcast dropped today. That was the main reason I recorded this episode so late. And then also, of course, it's the week of Valentine's Day, and I got to talk about love because as much as I'm a hopeless romantic, some of you are really dumb in love, just like myself. It's me. I'm dumb. So without further ado, why don't we just dive right in? And I will start this episode by saying Valentine's Day is hard. And it can be hard for a lot of people. There's a lot of feelings of not only loneliness, but there's a pressure on relationships. And especially if you're somebody who's found themselves in a situationship, like, there's so much pressure, so many questions. And, we see in movies and TV and marketing, it puts so much pressure on getting her flowers, getting her but not just any flowers, the right flowers and the right gift and the right jewelry, just like all the other holidays. But Valentine's Day is just like a whole other level. And what I'll say about that is, first, remember, if you are in a situationship, do not get him a gift. Do not get him a Valentine's Day gift. Don't nag him about what are we doing for Valentine's Day, okay? That should not be happening if you guys are not together, unfortunately. It's funny too, because Valentine's Day for me, if anybody should be cynical about Valentine's Day, it's me, okay? My last 2 relationships, our anniversary was Valentine's Day. That is crazy, and I will never be doing that again. Like, my life is a rom-com, just minus the rom part. But I still love Valentine's Day because I have found other ways to make it special. And a lot of that has to do with my mom. Like, I am a 26-year-old woman, and my mom still sends me Valentine's Day baskets asking me to be her Valentine's. And it's the sweetest thing ever. And if there ever comes a day where she wouldn't be sending me a basket, I'd be like, what the fuck did I do? Am I not your Valentine? Like, I seriously think I would cry if my mom didn't send me a Valentine's Day basket, but that's just who my mom is, and that's the relationship we have. And, obviously you see Galentine's Day has become a big thing, and I love that because obviously if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, you know that I really preach, pouring love into other avenues, especially our friends. And that's what I feel like Valentine's Day should be all about, is appreciating the love you do have in your life, regardless of if it's romantic or not. I think it's just another silly way to show the people that we love that you love them. But for a lot of us, not us, but for a lot of people, this may be your first Valentine's Day single in a long time. And that may trigger some things in you. It may, even if your relationship ended almost a year ago or even over a year ago at this point, and it's your second Valentine's Day single, like, you still may be struggling with that breakup. And what I want to say is breakup is another form of grief. That love doesn't just disappear into thin air. The love we had for that person doesn't just go poof, goodbye. And, most breakups don't happen due to a lack of love. It's usually not because you just fell out of love with that person, which sometimes is the case. Sometimes that is what happens, but oftentimes that's not the core reason. Maybe you realized you want different things for your future. You're on different life paths, things of that nature. And, for me, when I broke up with my ex multiple times, and yes, we broke up multiple times. I'm a dumb bitch. We know this. We've been over this, but we broke up multiple times. And for me, why I left him wasn't because I didn't love him. It was because I loving him was hurting me. And I was sacrificing myself and self-abandoning and losing myself by loving him. And I didn't know how to vocalize that at the time. I didn't know how to properly articulate these thoughts and feelings. And these are things I learned in therapy, and I learned the reasons I was self-abandoning and all that stuff. But, at the end of the day, loving him was hurting me greatly. And I finally had to hit the point where I put myself first. And, I can sit here and beat myself up of, why didn't I just leave it at the first breakup? Why didn't I leave it at the second breakup? Why didn't I leave it at the third breakup? Yes, I know. But the thing is, love and there's no logic when it comes to love. Love and logic, it's like oil and water. Like the two, they don't go together oftentimes. They should in some ways, and sometimes they can come together. But for the most part, we can't be too logical about the people we date, because that's, if you're thinking logically about your relationship, you may miss out on an extremely great connection because someone doesn't fit the logical pattern. And if you only lead with love, then you may be ignoring blatant red flags. But all that to say, love is confusing and love does not make sense. If you find yourself stuck in a situationship, or you're trying to choose somebody that's not choosing you back, I need you to really sit and ask yourself, why do I want this person? Is it because they really make me feel safe, seen, and heard? Or is it because you think that if he somehow chooses you, that maybe that says something about yourself? Or is it because you think if he chooses you, that people will see you the way you want to be seen? They'll think you're cool. They'll think you're hot. They'll think you're smart. They'll think you're funny. They will think something about you because this person chose you. Do you just want to be chosen? Because here's the thing, love is a two-way street. A healthy relationship is a two-way street. And at the end of the day, the person you are meant to be with is going to actively choose you. And the longer you chase that person who is not choosing you, you may be walking right past that person who will, and who will treat you 10 times better. So stop self-abandoning yourself just because you think you can get this person to love you. There shouldn't be any, I can make him love me. I'm gonna, if I do this, he'll see me the way I want to be seen. No, he won't. I learned this a long time ago, and this is where, a lot of this podcast was born, is I had to realize that my standards in dating, your standards in dating, are a reflection of how we see ourselves and the kind of treatment we think we deserve. And if you're so focused on how men perceive you and how other people perceive you, not just in romantic love, but in general, if you're so focused on that, you're going to continue self-abandoning and accepting less than you deserve. And at the end of the day, you're just never going to be happy in any relationship. For me, one of the biggest things that helped my confidence, especially when it came to dating, is just reframing the way I think about dating. And I will give you guys an example of this. For as long as I can remember, I have been told I am intimidating to people, especially by men. Men love to tell me I'm intimidating. I don't think I'm a very intimidating person at all, actually. I truly don't understand where this thought process comes from. I think I'm one of probably the least intimidating people out there. But when I ask people, why am I intimidating? I've been told, they don't have an answer. They can't really articulate why. And it used to make me think it was a bad thing and make me think that something was wrong with me. And maybe I'm off-putting. Maybe I'm the reason men aren't attracted to me because I'm intimidating. But here's the thing, and especially now that I've gotten older, I need to realize that's an unattractive thought process. Does my success intimidate you? Does my intelligence intimidate you? Does my ability to look you in the eyes and have a conversation intimidate you? Does my ability to call you out when you behave in a toxic, misogynistic, disrespectful way intimidate you? Because here's the thing. If a man is going to sit here and tell me I'm intimidating and then use that as a reason he's not interested in me, all that tells me is that he's not on my level. And that's how you need to think about dating too, is if you are somebody who has done the work on themselves and gotten to know themselves and you have built yourself from the ground up, you are going to want a partner who not only has done the same for themselves, but sees you and says, I know I can be better for her. You want somebody who's going to work just as hard as you, who's going to motivate you, and you'll motivate them, and you will drive each other to be the best version of yourselves in that relationship for each other, for your future. So we should be dating smarter, not harder. And there's a couple ways that we can do that. First things first is not just by knowing ourselves, but knowing our non-negotiables, okay? And I don't just mean I want somebody who's tall and kind and funny and smart and he has those washboard abs. Okay, we all want that. This isn't Build-A-Bear. We all want a man that looks like that. But what are your true non-negotiables? And I'm talking big ones and I'm talking small ones. Like for me, a small non-negotiable is I won't date a smoker. Okay, I don't want to be making out with a chimney. I won't date a guy who is not pro-choice. That's another non-negotiable for me. Knowing what your true non-negotiables are and knowing the things that you would just ideally like in a guy is going to help you in dating because you will recognize what is actually important to you versus just like, I'd like to have this. Because let's be real here. We're not going to like everything about our partners. There's actually going to be some things that you probably really dislike about your partner. But is it going to break your relationship? Probably not. That's up to you. Another thing that you have to do in dating that's really hard to do is you need to take accountability for your own actions. And what I mean by this is I'm not just talking about owning when you fuck up, but I'm talking about taking accountability for when you are keeping yourself in a situation that you know is not right from you. You need to know when to remove yourself from a situation, especially if somebody you are dating is telling you they have a problem with something fundamental about you that you are not willing to change. And again, I will give you an example. My ex had an issue with my guy friends. This is a very common debate. And I'm not here to talk about whether or not guys and girls can be friends, whether you can be friends with somebody that you've hooked up with in the past. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about the fact that my ex had this problem with my guy friends. And I said to him, I understand where you're coming from. Here are the ways I am willing to help make you more comfortable. But what I am not willing to do is cut them out of my life. And if you are not willing to accept that, then we should not be together. And that's one of the reasons when we were first getting to know each other, that we stopped talking. He's the one that came back around and said, you're right, I'm wrong, I need to give them a chance. He later admitted down the line that he was manipulating me and he was just hoping I would drop them. He entered into the relationship under false pretenses and I still stayed. I still stayed like a dumb bitch. My therapist would yell at me for calling myself a dumb bitch so many times this episode. But the point is, I kept myself in a situation where somebody was telling me they actively didn't like something about myself that I wasn't willing to change. And it was leading to a lot of friction from the jump. We should have never been in that relationship because there were things fundamentally that we didn't agree on. Another one, I've said this before, is don't be confused just being turned off by their behavior. Mixed signals are still signals. And yes, it's, people are complicated. People are enigmas. Like they may not be meaning to give you mixed signals, but at the end of the day, you should be able to detect if somebody is not interested in you. And the biggest piece I will say is there's nobody busier than somebody who is not interested in you. Okay. If somebody's actions and words aren't aligning, if they're saying they want to see you and then they're not making the plans to see you, even if it's 2-3 weeks down the road because they genuinely are that busy, that's an answer right there. They're going to find a way to not see you, but they're also going to want to string you along and keep you on the hook so that when they do suddenly basically want that late night hookup, they can hit you up. If you want to meet a certain type of person, go to where that person's going to frequent. If you don't want a guy that likes to go out to the bars, why are you going out with your girls on the weekend with the intent of trying to meet a guy? Okay, because he clearly likes going out with his boys. If you want somebody who is into fitness and all that, don't just go to the gym, but go to run clubs, go to other sort of health activities. I don't know what I'm saying. Volleyball leagues. That's a big thing here in Nashville. The point is as much as dating is just dumb luck, oftentimes we do still have control over certain aspects of our dating life. And a lot of that has to do with our relationship with ourselves. If you are with the wrong person, deep down you know it and you're just lying to yourself sometimes. I vividly remember saying to one of my friends one time pretty early on, like, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is not the guy that I'm going to marry. But I was like, but he's so good to me. He's so kind. I want to see it through. Look where that got me. 3 years of therapy later, we're still dealing with the bullshit. And it took me so long. It actually, we've been broken up for so long, but I only fully went no contact last year. Like that is what a toxic relationship can do to you in your life. And the reason I stayed is because I wanted to be loved so badly. And I kept choosing to give my love to somebody who was never going to love me back and said he was punishing me for loving him. And that's, his own trauma, his own experience, whatever. But at the end of the day, if you show somebody you will stay with them through anything, they are going to put you through everything. I showed him time and time again that he could fuck up and come crawling back. He could treat me however he wanted and come crawling back, and I would forgive him simply because he uttered the words, "I'm sorry," without doing any of the actual work to change. He put me through everything because I told him I would stay through anything. And that was me self-abandoning. So this Valentine's Day, make sure you're pouring love into yourself and your life, because this is really where the podcast's motto, dating, healing, living, comes into play. And I'm just going to read this. I wanted to look at the camera doing this, but I wrote this down perfectly. And you guys, if only could hear the outtakes, I kept getting, this is like a tongue twister. But dating, healing, living is the podcast's motto. And I don't think I've ever fully explained what it actually means. But the way I wrote it out was, we heal ourselves to continue living our best lives, to be the best version of ourselves for our future self, our future partner, and See, I got tongue-tied again. To be the best version of ourselves for our future self, our future partner, and our future family. And also, one last thing on Valentine's Day before I go into the next segment. If a guy is coming back into your life this Valentine's Day and he's going to hit you with the hey, or the I miss you, or just any of those kinds of texts, not even just on Valentine's Day, but in general, 9 times out of 10, I'll say 9.5 times out of 10, he's not coming back because he realized he loves you and he wants to see if it can work. The hopeless and romantic in me would love to believe that that's true, but no, he just wants to see how dumb you are still. He wants to see how vulnerable you are. He wants to see how desperate you are. He wants to see how much hold he still has over you, how much you still crave his attention and validation. He just wants to see how low your self-esteem is in this moment, especially on Valentine's Day, to see if you can hit it and quit it one last time. And I'm so sorry to say that, but that is more than likely true. And maybe not even necessarily that. He may also be just needing your attention and your validation to improve his ego and self-esteem. Unfortunately, that's the truth. He's not going to suddenly see the value that you have. He is just lonely, and his dick is probably hard. And he's probably just a little horny. And I'm so sorry to say that, but that is the other truth. So this Valentine's Day, I would still encourage you to go out. Doesn't even necessarily have to be with your girls. Take yourself to the gym, take yourself on a little date, go to a spa, go to your favorite bar with a book, whatever you want to do. But you can be your own Valentine, and there's no shame in that. Your mom can be your Valentine at 26 years old, and there is no shame in that. Or your little doggy can be your Valentine. He's ignoring me because he's mad. We haven't gone for a WALK yet. Yep, see, that perked him right up. Anyways, so Valentine's Day talk concluded, leading into another not so great love story. It's the one of Justin Baldoni. Am I well? Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively. There have been a lot of updates on the case since I last spoke on that topic. I'm not going to sit here and recap all of it because it's just a lot of, one, information. Two, I feel like then every single episode would be about this case, especially the solo ones. But since, what I will say is, a lot of Blake Lively's claims have now been proven false. And the very first episode, the season premiere that I talked about this, I was really hesitant to quote unquote choose a side. And I still don't want to even think of this as choosing a side, because I don't think there should be a side to be had. It should just be about right and wrong. And frankly, after seeing everything that has continued to come out, I can't help but believe Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds are in the wrong here. I think for myself and a lot of women, you want to believe the victim. We wanted to believe Blake Lively. Even if you didn't like her, you wanted to believe her because she's the woman in this situation. Unfortunately, with all the evidence I have currently seen, that just does not seem to be the case. And what solidified it for me was not just Justin Baldoni's evidence, the website, all of that stuff. It wasn't just that, but the podcast episode that came out today, I already was leaning this way, but this really just solidified it for me. So back in November of 2024, before Blake Lively filed her lawsuit. As part of his press tour, Justin Baldoni went on a podcast called Gents Talk. And I had never heard of this podcast. I had no prior impressions of it. But I listened to their episode with Justin Baldoni so that you didn't have to. And I am very sad to say that obviously it's not filled with the tea that people would have wanted. Do I think it's still worth listening to? Absolutely, because this conversation is what did it for me. Because no matter what you want to say or believe about abusive men and how they perceive the world around them and themselves, no man who would truly do the things that Blake Lively is saying Justin Baldoni did, I think would be able to articulate masculinity, emotional intelligence, and all of these topics in the way Justin Baldoni did in this podcast episode and be so vulnerable and honest. I mean, some people may sit and listen to that episode and be like, see, he's just still manipulating us to think he's this great guy. And I just would have such a hard, like, if that's the case, I would say give that man his fucking Oscar, because round of applause. I mean, this episode had me tearing up because it was so refreshing. Granted, I've listened to Man Enough podcasts and whatever, but there was something about this conversation and hearing the way Justin Baldoni talked about not only It Ends With Us, but his own issues with his current wife and their early relationship. That gave me such a newfound respect for him, because he even talked about past girlfriends and the way he failed them, the ways he exhibited, toxicity and emotional abuse and all of these things. Like, for everything, he took ownership. And I don't think, and I'm not a therapist, but I don't think a narcissist is ever capable of doing that. Something else that I found interesting about this episode with Justin Baldoni is, while he doesn't explicitly talk about Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds and the impending lawsuit, because we have to infer at this point he probably was already threatened with the suit. He probably knew it was coming, or maybe he didn't. But he talks about in the very beginning of this podcast episode how he sent a text to his business partner, his assistant, and in this text, he talks about how he was really struggling emotionally and mentally and how hard this year was for him. And you can see when he's talking about this, he is so incredibly drained. But he was still careful with his words. And in this entire episode, he is talking about accountability and making space for men. And it was really refreshing to see two men holding space for each other to have this vulnerable conversation. I said that earlier, but it was a really refreshing thing to see. And why I wanted to point out the way he talks about his text is he's not approaching it in the sense of, these things happen to me, everyone feel bad for me. He was approaching it in such a vulnerable way of I needed to let my team know why I was struggling and where I was struggling so that they understood why I wasn't present for them. That's at least how I took it, which again is it takes such emotional intelligence. And that's why after this podcast episode, it is virtually impossible for me at this point to even consider Blake Lively is telling the truth in any regard. Like I said, two things can be true at once, and maybe there are times she did feel he crossed a line and she was uncomfortable, but that doesn't require all of this mess, right? Something else too is, why I just have a hard time believing her at this point is because of the way he speaks about his intentions in the movie. I already talked about how he wanted men to, recognize their own behaviors from it, but he really just wanted this movie to be a mirror for men. He wanted this movie to be a mirror and a reflection for them to see how their actions harm the women that they love in their life. And that is just such a powerful and beautiful thing, because it's not very often that men can look at a situation that way and take their ego out of it. And instead, that's why just like I said with the Barbie movie all the way last year, of how it's very telling to me how a guy reacts to the Barbie movie. This is another one of those movies, for all the drama aside, this is another movie that I know everything I need to know about a man by the way he reacts to this movie. And I don't even know if Colleen Hoover thought about this book so deeply and profoundly. I don't even know if she understood the true impact of what she wrote. I hate to say that, but all of this drama leads me to believe that, because at the end of the day, like she was still a part of this drama in a way. And obviously now she's kind of disappeared from socials and has gone completely MIA. I think for women, not just that we want to believe women, like I said earlier, I think it's almost very natural for us to not trust men who are like Justin Baldoni and are very in touch with their emotions, very open about them. And that sucks because, again, I think a lot of women are so used to being manipulated by those kinds of men that, again, it was easy to believe like, oh, yep, he fooled all of us. You know what I mean? But I just, again, after hearing this podcast episode, hearing him have these conversations, and again, they're the same conversations he's always had, but knowing he was still that same person after all this drama was happening is what was refreshing, because that conversation could have gone so incredibly different, and he could have used it as an opportunity to almost get ahead of the narrative, but I don't think he did that. And also, I wonder if that's part of why this episode was held, is because he knew the lawsuit was coming. I really don't know. Obviously, there's a lot of unanswered questions in that, but what I do know is, like I said, I have so much respect for him after this episode, and I hope he does get some form of justice. Obviously, like I've said a million times, that this case was already on trial in the court of public opinion, and it is very clear who is currently winning that battle. Obviously, that doesn't do anything for his reputation, the damages, and all that stuff. And something else, too, I want to speak on is a clip of mine from this podcast where I talked about how he has nothing to lose at this point. So, like, of course, he's going to release text after text. A lot of people took that the wrong way, and I want to clarify what I meant by that. What I meant by that was he has nothing to lose because everything is already on the line and called into question. His reputation, his character, like every aspect of his life is already on the main stage in the public eye under a microscope. So while, yes, he has a lot to lose, what I mean by he has nothing to lose is he is going to reveal everything he's got because he has nothing to hide. And that's what I meant by that phrase. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. So I found it interesting the way he spoke about toxic masculinity. And he says he doesn't believe masculinity is toxic. And he talks about how it's weaponized and politicized and used against men, and made to make them feel less than. And it's just fascinating. Again, it's fascinating and refreshing to hear that conversation coming from men who are not in this alpha male bravado, like red pill masculinity bullshit. And I just found it interesting, again, because it would be crazy for me to hear a man talk about masculinity and be so open in this way and then do the things that he supposedly did to Blake Lively. That would just be a wild duality. But he talked about how men are on a never-ending quest for improvement. And it's true. Like when I look at not just the content on the internet, but like the content that my guy friends consume and the way they speak to each other, it's always in this idea of improving themselves. And this is where a lot of that content falls short, is oftentimes it's not in regards to how can they improve themselves for their emotional health and the women in their lives. It's how can I make more money? How can I look more fit? How can I, be the alpha of my friend group or whatever? And again, whose fault is that? Society. Society has not taught men that they are safe and comfortable to express emotion. And for a lot of men, maybe even the women in their lives are also part of that narrative. So while men are the perpetrators of a lot of these issues, I think as women, it's also on us to make the men in our lives feel safe to be emotionally available and vulnerable with us. Again, I'm not saying anything else other than that. I feel like even that people may try and take out of context, but it's important and true. But what I will say is, again, like I said, this episode did not have the tea that we wanted because it happened before all this happened. But Justin Baldoni did talk about It Ends With Us in this episode. And I loved the way that he spoke about it because it's exactly how I would have wanted to direct it if I was the director, but how I think men should have perceived it. And it just kills me that we can't see his cut of the movie. I hope one day, maybe somehow, his cut gets to be released, because I would love to see what the differences are in how not only just like the movie as a whole, but the way Ryle is portrayed. Because something he talked about is how he knew that if he made Ryle the villain in the film, that he'd lose the men in the audience. And what I mean by that, and what he meant by that, is like they would just tune out and be like, see, this is a man-hater movie, fuck men. And there are some men that still did that, but his message is he wanted men to see that they could lose everything by not healing themselves. And that's really true. And he also talked about how he wanted to, with this movie, reframe the question from why did she stay to why did he hurt her? And he talks about how violence against women isn't a women's issue, it's a men's issue, which is true. I say this all the time. Women everywhere scream this from the rooftops. Finally, we hear a man in the media saying it. Are men still going to listen? Probably not. But he wanted, when he was directing this film, he also said he wanted women to still see themselves and didn't want to take that away from women, but he also wanted men to see themselves and see what happens when they don't resolve their trauma, which I think is a really powerful thing, because again, we have seen, and there's so many studies about men's mental health. And while they're all out there, a lot of men are still resistant to doing that work inwards. And it's frankly because, my personal opinion is, it's frankly because they've never had to. Men never had to face their emotions. They were told to not have emotions, and life worked out great for them. That's not the case anymore. This was a line that stuck with me. He acknowledges that men at their heart can be good, but they're still unable to control their fears, their insecurities, and instead they hurt the women they love. And this is what I always say is hurt people hurt people. Like, if somebody hates themselves, they are absolutely going to punish you for loving them. And it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. So like, this is why therapy is so important. It's so important to confront these things with ourselves. And he talked about how he referenced a couple studies. He just said data though. I don't know what studies he's actually pulling from. He said, data shows the only way for a man to stop abusing is for that woman to leave. And in the next relationship, he can break the cycle. No matter how much you love him, he unfortunately is not going to change until you leave him. And there's always that fear of, well, what if he is better for the next woman? That's great if he is, because it means he finally recognized his own issues and he grew the fuck up. But unfortunately, if you are stuck in an emotionally abusive, even physically abusive relationship, he will never change. He will never stop hurting you until you leave. It is on you to leave. And that's just a very quick summary of that podcast episode. Like I said, it's the Gents Talk podcast. I would truly, truly encourage you to go listen. After this episode, for me, I would love to check out future episodes from these guys. I think it was so refreshing. These are the only men I think that I'm okay with having a microphone and having a podcast. It was just so refreshing to hear masculinity and emotional availability talked about in this regard from men. I think especially, again, in the current climate that we're in, we're seeing a lot of men fall into the red pill trap. And it's because for the first time, they've been being made to feel uncomfortable. Men have never had to feel uncomfortable in society. You know, now they're having to compete with women, not just, not just in the job field, but just in all aspects of their life. Like, them being a provider is not enough anymore. And I think that's why we see so many men falling back into this, we want traditional relationships BS, when they don't actually want a traditional relationship. I think this episode with Justin Baldoni, I think with it getting released, that also says a lot, because this podcast could have buried this episode so deep that nobody ever knew he even recorded it. The fact that they chose to still release this episode, and whether they held off on it because they weren't sure at first or they needed clearance from Justin Baldoni's team, I don't know. But the fact that this episode even got released shows how strong the public support is for Justin Baldoni, how this podcast is very clearly taking a side, and how strong of a case Justin Baldoni has. Now, I will say, in regards to his case with the New York Times, I've said it before and I'll say it again, for him to prove defamation is going to still be incredibly difficult because he needs to prove that the New York Times, like I said, he's got the burden of proof of showing that they knew they were publishing false statements. It doesn't mean that they can't publish false statements. It just means that they had to have known they were doing so. And for the publication to have also broken the Harvey Weinstein story, they probably thought that this was they were blowing the lid wide open on another scandal just like that. And I hate to say it, but it seems like Blake Lively may have exploited that. And it seems like she has exploited a lot about women and the Me Too movement. And again, it pains me to say that because I would love to believe women. You hear of these kinds of things still happening in 2025 all the time. I think two things can be true at once. It could be that maybe there were times where she was uncomfortable and felt as though this was harassment, but it could also be true that Justin Baldoni was still doing everything right and doing everything by the book, and two things could be true at once. It's a really, like I said, it's a really unfortunate situation, and no one at the end of the day, even if and when Justin Baldoni wins these cases, there's still no winners in this situation. All that anybody is ever going to remember of this movie is this drama. Nobody is going to remember any of these words that Justin Baldoni said, of his intention behind directing it, of what he wanted men to take away from the movie, of how he wanted women to see themselves in the movie, and how he wanted them to recognize the way that they were being treated and be able to get out of these situations. Like, nobody is going to remember what this movie could have been. People are just going to remember what it actually was. And what it was a hot fucking mess, unfortunately. So like I said, when there's another, I'm not going to keep doing these like crazy every single day updates, but when there is another major update on this case, you bet your bottom dollar I will be talking about it. Because at the end of the day, film, art, it's my passion. And especially stories like this, you guys know that I love it. Art is always going to be complicated and messy, but it shouldn't be complicated and messy in this way. But the best art, in my opinion, is the art that has a hidden, deeper meaning, and you don't even realize it, and you have to sit and dissect and take it apart. And not everyone's good at doing that when it comes to art. I know I wasn't at first, especially when it came to reading and writing. I remember my 9th grade English class. English was always my best subject, by the way. Like, I always had straight A's in English. My 9th grade English class, I think I got like my first B- and freaked the fuck out. And it was doing analysis of mice and men. And I remember I wasn't picking up on symbolism and deeper meanings. And I was just missing blatant things that now looking back, I'm like, wow, that was right in my face. But it's because that deeper form of analysis I had to get good at doing. And my thoughts had never been provoked in that way before that class. And why I bring that example up is because of Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance last night. If you're somebody who sat there saying, I don't get it, or that was boring, like, I would so encourage you to go look up all of the symbolism that was in that performance, because that wasn't just a halftime show. That was a piece of performance art. And Kendrick Lamar just gave everybody a lesson on what it truly means to be an artist. From everything from Samuel L. Jackson introducing him, to his dancers being in red, white, and blue, to the way that their movements were on the stage, was so telling and compelling. Also, from this performance, I realized I'm not petty enough with people, okay? Kendrick Lamar is the king of short kings. If that man can look the camera dead in the eye and call Drake's name out in the middle of all these lawsuits, you can absolutely call that shitty man out on his toxic behavior, all right? That man, it was petty and was living for it. That smile on his face, bravo, king of short kings. That is some 6'5" energy. And that man is, I think, like 5'7". So bravo. But a lot of the discourse I've seen and critique on this performance was that it's the Super Bowl. It shouldn't be political. The halftime performance shouldn't have been political. Everything in life, especially now, is political, especially for Black Americans. Okay. For Kendrick Lamar to be able to do this performance, especially during Black History Month, because by the way, even though the Trump administration won't acknowledge it, it is still Black History Month, all right, is so important and powerful. And that performance, I know, meant so much to the Black community. I learned a lot from that performance as well, because there were certain meanings and messages that I didn't understand, like 40 acres and a mule. I didn't know what that meant. I went and looked it up and was shocked to learn what the meaning was. There were so many lines in that performance that someone should do an entire thesis on it. But if you're one of the people that are sitting there saying this performance was boring or it shouldn't have been political, I need you to ask yourself why. I don't care who you voted for right now, but I truly need to ask yourself why. If you are able to say that your life and experiences aren't political, that is a privilege in these times. If you are sitting there saying that your life is not currently affected by the decisions being made and the bills that are being not just passed, but also even like brought to the House floor, that is a privilege. There are a lot of people who are scared right now, myself included, seeing what is going on in this country. So if you're sitting there saying that you're not paying attention or you don't watch the news because it stresses you out, that is a privilege, because that means that you are able to be so ignorant and aloof to the things that are going on and your life is still unaffected. That, in today's world, unfortunately, is not the reality for a majority of Americans. As a New York Giants fan, it really, truly pained me to be rooting for the Philadelphia Eagles. But I am so happy that the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl, because to me, that was karma. Sorry to the Chiefs. Between Butker and his comments about women, like, I did a whole episode talking about that. Atrocious. Atrocious is the only way to describe it. So yeah, that is probably the one and only time I will ever in my life say I rooted for the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles fans, you're welcome. That is all for this episode of Not the Girl Next Door. I hope you guys have a very happy Valentine's Day. Don't forget to love yourselves this year. Make sure you leave us a 5-star review wherever you are listening. And I will see you guys next week for another episode. Bye for now.